Hello, my name's Gabriel Garcia. I'm an attorney in San Antonio. I work with CPS Energy, which is a municipally owned electric and gas utility. But I'm also an officer with TATOA, the Texas Association of Telecommunications Officers and Advisors, which is a mouthful. I'm the vice president, and I have been involved with TATOA for many years, and also at the national level with NATOA, the National Association. And I was in charge of the policy and legal program for this year's conference, which we just finished here in McAllen.
And we were very proud and pleased to have you, an organization of your importance, to come down to the Valley for your annual meeting.
Yes, and actually this is the first time that we come to McAllen, and McAllen was a wonderful host. We held the conference here at the convention center, and it was a great success. You know, yesterday we had a full day dedicated to broadband sessions, and so we sort of started by giving an overview of what are funding opportunities at the federal level, and then how are they being implemented at the state level, and then more importantly, where do we expect that money to go? Essentially, the funding that is available in the billions of dollars is primarily intended to go to rural areas. And that essentially means cities with populations of under 20,000. And then if there's some money left over, then to underserved areas. And that would be, say, low-income neighborhoods in more urban areas. And what that means is that really for larger cities over 20,000, they're not going to see a lot of money from this federal funding, even though it's substantial. It's over $46 billion. But the need is so large that it's going to be challenging for larger cities, and larger, I mean over 20,000. So they're going to have to find other resources. And so that's part of what we covered in the conference, is so what other resources are available for local governments that are facing, the challenge of the digital divide. And the challenge is that we are now in the digital economy. And if you don't have a fair distribution of broadband infrastructure, then that means that the companies and the education that's necessary to participate in the digital economy, those cities that don't have that infrastructure are not going to be able to build the companies of the digital economy because they need broadband infrastructure. They're not going to be able to have the employment opportunities because those companies are not going to be there. And students are not going to be able to fully participate in the digital economy, and that's a huge drain to our overall economy.
So historically, we've always thought that broadband, historically it hasn't been going that many years, a few decades, yes. But it's been the purview of the private sector. Mm-hmm. The private internet service providers have always provided the service. Why is it the case that the federal government and then passing the money down to the local governments, why do the municipalities feel the need to get involved in this?
Sure.
Rather than the private sector?
That's a very good question. So let's start with why the digital divide exists. The digital divide exists because broadband internet service is an unregulated service. What that means is that existing providers don't have a legal duty to provide service to anybody. It also means that anybody can provide internet service. You can provide internet service. I can provide internet service. And what's happened is that because it's unregulated service, the large internet service providers are going to deploy infrastructure where they can maximize profits because that's what their shareholders demand. And so that means by almost really by definition, rural areas where there's not a lot of density, you can't recover your costs, much less make a profit. Low-income neighborhoods in urban areas, it's the same challenge. So those are the challenges of the way the market is structured. So there's no blame here. That's just the way the broadband infrastructure market works. So where where cities where residents don't have access, you've heard of the homework gap. Students having able to have to do homework, they have to use the internet to use homework. They don't have a reliable connection for the reasons that I just explained at home, and so they have to go to the local, McDonald's or to the library or to their school and be there at night doing their homework. And that is the challenge that local governments are seeing. Beyond that, it's about economic development. As I said earlier, we are now in the digital economy. In the digital economy, geography doesn't exist. If you're providing a digital service, you can reach customers anywhere in the world. And so that has enabled companies, online companies, like Google, and many others, to be able to reach customers everywhere in the world. So now they have, billions of subscribers. That's what's possible in the internet economy. And so if you're a local government and you don't have broadband infrastructure, then you're looking at a future where you're not going to be able to participate in that type of economic activity, that type of growth. That's what's at stake. It's not just about the inequity of students not being able to connect at home and have to go to a place where they can have access to Wi-Fi at night. It's about the future of our economy. So if we don't have fair distribution of broadband infrastructure, you can see a future where cities that have broadband infrastructure, let's say San Francisco, Silicon Valley, in Texas, Austin, Texas, that's where the new companies of the new economy are going to grow. And then cities that don't have broadband infrastructure, well, those cities are not going to see that type of economic development. So the stakes is really the future of our economy, because fiber infrastructure is the foundation for 5G wireless networks. 5G wireless networks then enable the Internet of Things. The Internet of Things enables big data, and big data enables artificial intelligence. So when we're looking at a future where companies are going to be built based on, for example, artificial intelligence, business models. If you're in a community that doesn't have broadband infrastructure, you're just not going to be. Those companies are not going to grow there. It's as simple as that.
Bringing this home to the Rio Grande Valley, at this conference we've heard about the incredible work being done by the city of FAR, the city of Brownsville. Those are the two cities in the valley that have got the most coverage news-wise and seem to be further along in providing high-speed internet for their residents. But I was fascinated by one of the panels yesterday where Judy Quisenberry, she's the executive director of Valley Baptist Legacy Foundation, and she was saying that in her view, some of the city leadership outside of those two cities, they don't even realize that there's an internet problem in their communities, and it's because they don't understand that so many of the residents in their communities cannot afford, because the internet's provided by the private internet service providers. They think they don't have a broadband problem or digital divide problem, but they do, she argued, because local residents, particularly in a socio-economic area like the Valley, so the residents simply cannot afford the rates. Your thoughts?
So when you think about how our economy has grown until now, we could not have grown the economy we have today without telephone. So just think about basic telephone. Forget the internet for a minute here. Just think about basic telephone. If only 30% of people have telephone, what kind of economy are you going to have? If you have 50%, what kind of economy are you going to have? Certainly not the same economy as if 95%, 99% of people have a telephone. And that is because in commerce, you need two-way communications. And that's what the telephone did for the growth of the brick and mortar economy. It enabled transactions to happen on a daily basis. Communications is essential for our modern economy. So now as we enter the digital economy, broadband infrastructure, broadband networks are essentially the same as telephone networks were to the brick and mortar economy. By way of analogy, think about in the brick and mortar economy, our roads. Our roads are necessary for commerce. Interstate commerce or intrastate commerce, simply the delivery of services, consumers being able to go to the grocery store, to the shopping center, etc. Roads are essential for commerce. In the digital economy, those roads are invisible. They're virtual. And they're of different sizes or different capacities. If you have fiber infrastructure, then you have highways. If you have copper-based networks, then you have essentially, small roads.
Farm-to-market roads.
That's correct. Mm-hmm. And as you could, it's by way of analogy, in the brick and mortar economy, if all you have are, small roads, then you're not going to be able to grow your economy in the same way as a large city that has highways and boulevards. It's really the same analogy. And so, but what makes it difficult for the average person is that they're invisible. So they don't see, elected officials don't see the roads because they're in the air, they're wireless, they're on poles or they're underground in wires, in fiber. But the optical equipment that facilitates, that creates the bandwidth, that creates the size of the highway is there. And the size of the highway in the digital economy depends on what type of wire you have. And another misconception is that wireless networks do not need wire. They're a substitute for wire. And that's not true. They're complementary. Fiber infrastructure is necessary for wireless networks. The wireless networks are 99% wired and 1% wireless. The connection, the wireless connection is between your cell phone and the closest router when you're inside a building. Literally, it could just be a few feet. And from that point, it's wired back to the network. And when you're driving or when you're outside, it's the connection, the wireless connection is between you and the closest cell tower. From that point, it's fiber, it's wired back to the network. But people don't see this. And so they don't understand how critical it is to have these virtual highways that are enabled by fiber. That's why it's difficult for local governments to see it, or elected officials to see it.
What would your advice be to those city leaders that represent cities that really haven't moved on this subject yet, that haven't made this a priority?
So they need to get educated, and they really need a champion. One of the things that we've learned as we've talked about best practices, Tatoa, for example, we have been putting this conferences for some time now, over a decade, and over that decade we have developed best practices. Okay. Best practices exist out there. Seek them out. And at the end of the day, however, you need a champion. In FAR, the mayor has been the champion. In Brownsville, the mayor and the city manager have been the champions. without a champion, it's very difficult to get these projects going because you need to have stakeholders in that community. Somebody needs to bring them together. Every community has a different configuration of stakeholders. So this is a very localized type of movement, but you need to have a champion in order for that to occur. And what Judy's saying essentially is because we can't see the infrastructure, it's difficult for elected officials to understand it. They need to get educated.
She also recommended a valley-wide organization, that some organization needs to emerge or be formed, or maybe an existing group like the Council of Government, the Lower Rio Grande Valley Development Council, needs to take the lead and set up a committee for the whole valley for broadband. And the example she gave was how the valley's transportation system has been improving in recent years because all the metropolitan planning organizations, we had 3, got together and merged into one. So we now have one new entity, government entity that caters for our transportation needs. She feels that the same needs to happen with broadband.
Yes, and that's for 2 reasons. First of all, if there's money available right now, there's broadband dollars. Some of them, like I said, some of them will go to underserved areas. The valley as a whole is a combination of underserved and unserved. So if you have a regional approach to seeking federal grants, you're going to be able to make a more compelling argument for funding if you have partners, regional-wide partners. The other reason is what I was referring to earlier about, say, Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is not a city. Silicon Valley is a region. You have fiber infrastructure region-wide. The Rio Grande Valley can have the same opportunities if you have broadband infrastructure, particularly fiber infrastructure, region-wide. Because then it's not just one city having those opportunities, like what the city of FAR is creating. You can now have that for the entire region. That is a much more compelling argument for economic development, for education, for training, for the new jobs of the digital economy, and for raising essentially the standard of living for everybody across the Rio Grande Valley region.
For healthcare as well.
Absolutely. Telehealth. Telehealth is, as you know, rural areas have lost hospitals. They're now beginning to lose prenatal care clinics. And so the ability to have telehealth is crucial for just everyday, the ability to seek health care that is not emergency based. For preventive care, it's crucial. And so there's huge benefits to have the ability for average people to be able to have telehealth available to them, particularly the elderly. So yes, of course, that is part of the digital economy. And so again, are you going to have, small roads, or do you want large highways? That's really what's at stake here.
Last question, Gabriel. This conference has been so educational, so informative, and I'm sure your message today, the city leaders up and down the valley will be really interested in this. So at the very end, I'll ask them if they want to connect with you, how they might call you or email you. But the last question for me would be, you're very much an expert on this subject, but was there anything at this conference that sort of jumped out the page at you? Did you learn anything that you weren't aware of before? Any new developments in this industry that are important?
Yes. So first of all, I want to compliment the city of FAR, the city of Brownsville, because they really are doing some of the most creative work in the United States, in the country. The other thing that I noticed is that there is now cooperation among different entities, different stakeholders across the community. And why is that important? Well, it's important because infrastructure is think infrastructure as technology, broadband networks. They're only a means to an end. The purpose of technology is to increase the standard of living. So not only do you need to have infrastructure, you also need to teach people how to use it. You need to make broadband subscriptions affordable. You need to ensure, particularly the marginalized populations that have not had access, and low-income families, have access to devices. And then you have to train them to use those tools in the way that probably you and I use them, to pay our bills, to do online banking, and many other things. That is how you raise the entire population, the standard of growth for everybody. That requires different stakeholders across the community to work together, because no one can do that alone. There are certain organizations that are good at job training. There are some organizations that are good at education. There are other organizations that are good at experiential learning, internships, etc. And we saw all that in this conference, and that's the first time that I've seen that.
Well, that's very interesting. Well, thank you for so much for giving us so much of your time, Gabriel. As I say, if there's any leaders in the Rio Grande Valley that want to connect with you, want to pick your brains some more, how do they reach you?
So probably by phone. Again, the work that I do for TATOA is pro bono. I've been doing this work for, 15 plus years. And I do it because I care. This is important for our, for our communities. I represent local governments, and it's important for our cities. I can be reached at 210-232-5731 or at ggarcia1@cpsenergy.com.
Gabriel Garcia of TATOA, thank you so much for today's interview. We've learned so much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.